So I was having a look through the old YouTube and was trying to find videos talking about medieval pins and needles, specifically how to make them. And when I look up needles or pins on YouTube, if that bloody thing will focus. Focus. Come on. Technology. Well, you can sort of get the idea. There's a needle and there is a coil head pin. Can you bloody focus, please? Okay, it's choosing not to. Anyway, making pins and needles in the medieval fashion, or just the historical way that they were made pretty much up until the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to show you how to make two types of pins and one type of needle, because really there's only one way to make needles out of the kind of material I'm making them out of today, and that is 1mm bronze wire. Now you'll see a lot of tutorials online on how to make bone needles and wooden needles, but these are really big needles. These are like nail binding needles, as opposed to these, which are actual sewing needles you can actually use actual sewing techniques with. I mean, you can very easily take this needle and put it through fabric, pretty easily, and just, do your sewing through several layers of fabric readily without it snagging. Now, I'm going to be showing you how to make them. Unfortunately, my camera setup is not super professional, so I can't give you a close-up view of what I'm doing, but it's pretty intuitive and pretty simple to figure it out once I've explained it. And if you've got any level of basic silversmithing skill, this will be fine for you. So, yes, we're going to make the two different types of needles, the knot head and the crimped head, and I'll explain those as I get to them, or rather the two types of pins, and then we'll talk about making the needle. So let's start by making the simplest pin. So for this we're going to need a few little bits of gear. We're going to need a pair of needle nose pliers, preferably quite small. The smallest ones you can get, the better, really. You really want them as small as you can get. These are not as small as I'd like, but they will do the job. A pair of clippers, snip in your wire, and maybe a pair of actual grippy tongs for doing the filing. But we're just going to take our 1mm bronze wire. You could use brass, but I like using bronze because it's easier to anneal, and you do want this to be annealed, particularly when you're working with the knotted style of pin, and also making the needles, you need it to be able to be annealed. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get our little length, and we're going to clip about, how much do I want for a pin? And this is going to be a knotted pin, so I want to give myself a little bit like that. See, so now we've got our little length of pin. I'm going to grip it in my grippers, and we're going to need a blowtorch. You could use just a brûlée torch. I just happen to have a big map gas torch because I make knives and stuff, so it's handy. Get it red hot, stick it in some water. I've got my little water dish here. It's good to have water tins available. So now what we've done, if you can see that, is we've annealed this end. It's a little bit more pinky on this end because it's been annealed, and that means that we can rotate it better. So the simplest way to do this is just take it in your pliers for the very end, curl it around, and we want to coil it around itself a couple of times. So I'll just do this and then I'll show you. You want to coil it around a couple of times, just like that. So we've got a single coil. Now we'll just clean that up, so we'll crimp it and straighten it out so it's like a loop. And that is the absolute simplest type of pin. Flatten it on your little anvil, and that's a basic pin head that you can use. And this is a very sort of early style. Typically these would be bigger historically. Pins were usually sort of dress items. They didn't really get used for sewing till a little bit later, I think, but don't quote me on that. I'm not an expert. I'm not a historian or anything. I just like making things. And I'm going to just rotate and hammer it, especially up in the top portion where it's annealed. And I want to do this to harden it, to work harden it. I'm doing it with a flat, polished faced hammer, so I don't leave any real nasty dents. And I just want to make sure that it doesn't bend too badly. This is more important for needles, but pins it's quite useful. So now I've just got that rotated tip. And you could just knot this. You could take this loop and then tuck the rest of this back through the loop and pull it tight and make a knot. That's another option, but this is easily the simplest. And these can be made really, really quick. So now what we're going to do is put it in our little filing block. I think it's called a bench hook, and all that is a piece of wood with a few grooves carved into it which fit your wire into. And then you just take a file and rotate, if you can, you rotate your pin as you file, and what that does is it will allow us to sharpen the end quite effectively. So do that side, flip it over, do the other side. This will be a bit fiddly. If you need to use a pair of pliers to do this, that's fine. I just get used to doing it with my fingers. After a while, this will take its toll on your fingers. Your fingers will get sore because you're gripping a very small piece of wire. But it's worth it if you want to make historical pins. And they don't take too long to make either. Put on like a, I don't know, your favourite music, audio book, YouTube video in the background, whatever it is, and you can just sit in your little workshop, filing away, making pins. This was a job that was traditionally done by children, actually. It was a very low-paying job in the Tudor period, especially. People weren't really treated very nicely. Unions didn't exist then, so it was like, well, you know, if you were crippled, old, or young, too young to do skilled work, working in the pin making workshops would have been a way to make a small, meagre living. It was small, fiddly work, so children were often employed to do it. So there you go. That is a simple loop-style pin, and that can be used in sewing. That can be used to, I don't know, pin your wimple on, or whatever it is that you need to use them for. I just use them for sewing, because obviously I don't wear a wimple because I'm a bloke, and you know, I do bloke things, innit? So the loop styles are pretty intuitive. You've got all the various different styles of loopy heads, but we're now going to make this style of head here. So what I'm going to do is make a nice crimped head needle, or not needle, pin. Looks a bit like this. It's different to our last one. So if you can see it, the camera will not focus because it's being an arse, but you can see it's a much smaller head compared to the twirly heads on these other pins. It's much smaller. So the way we do this is, first of all, we need to anneal our piece again. So we're going to anneal the end, cool it off in water, and we're going to make a very small coil of our bronze wire. And what we're going to do is we're going to have it overlap on itself. And that's important. By overlapping it, we can crimp it. These are the smallest flat pliers I've got that don't have nasty bits in them. But what we're going to do now is just clip off this little piece here. I'm going to clip it off into one of the little wells of my little shop anvil here, this little anvil I use as a jeweler's anvil. You can see it's really beat up, but I use it in the shop, which is useful for things. Little loop. I'm going to thread it over the end, if I can flatten out the end of this pin here. I'm going to loop it over the end of this pin, and we're going to try crimping it. This is why you want really small needle nose pliers, because you can wrap a really small loop that's the same diameter as your pin. But I don't have that, so I'm working with what I got. So I'm going to try and loop that on and crimp it on in place. So you see I've crimped it on now. I'm going to clean that up by hammering it. And I'm going to curl around those tails. Ideally, you'd have these cut perfectly to your needs. I do not. But we can fiddle and fettle. And there you have your coil head. That little coil has been crimped on now to the end of your pin. And then you can just clean that up with a file. If you're a really good pin maker, which I am not, you don't need to do much filing, and you wouldn't want to anyway, because filing means more time, and time is money, and you got paid by the pin. So you didn't want to be spending any more time than you had to making these things. Queen Elizabeth actually made it law to have the heads of these soldered on so they wouldn't come off. So you could do quality manufacturing of these things, but it meant that each needle, or rather each pin, would have been way more expensive. There you go, that's how you do the little crimped head, that's how you do the little round head, or rather pinned head. I could show you the sharpening again, but I'll do that later off screen. Don't want this video overrunning. So now I'll show you how to make a needle. Right, let's make a needle. So what we'll need for the needle is the exact same stuff as the pins. We'll use this 1mm bronze wire, which the camera doesn't want to show because it's irritating. So what we'll do is we'll take a length and we'll decide how long we want our needle. About that. So now we've got our little needle blank here. So what we'll do, first of all, on our anvil, is flatten out one end. Now what we want to do with this is we want it flat enough that our punch, you can see here, if the camera will show it, this is the right diameter for a needle eye. And we want to be able to have that come down here and fit just onto that flat portion, just enough, so that it will give us enough space to punch an eye. So I'm going to give it a little bit more of a tap. We don't want it any wider than we have to, because the more you hammer it, the thinner you'll make it, and that'll make the eye weaker. So we only want to hammer it a little bit. But what we'll end up with, hopefully, is, there we go, straighten out. It's useful to use your wooden bit to straighten it out. This wood is a very hard, tough wood, so it doesn't mushroom easily. But now I've got, if you can see that, I hope you can see it, I've got this flattened here. There you go, you can see that. A little bit flattened on the end. So my little punch, as I say, will fit on that, and I can punch a hole. Now I don't want to punch a hole straight away, I want to anneal this first, because otherwise, because I've already work hardened it by hammering it, if I try to punch it now, it will just break. It's too brittle. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to anneal it, blast it with a bit of heat, quench it in the water, and when you anneal, in case you don't know how to anneal it, you'd want it to be basically just about cherry red in colour. You don't want it any hotter than that, because with thin wire like this it will melt very quickly. You just want to make it sort of a cherry red colour, just glowing red. Once it's glowed red, it's annealed. You just need to cool it off. So at that point we've now got a very, very soft little tab, and now we're just going to punch the hole. Now this can be very tricky, so find a flat spot on your anvil, line up your punch, make sure it's well lined up, and with your hammer now I have, and there you go, we have punched an owl all the way through. Very blurry, but I think you can just about see it. So now we've punched a hole all the way through, we have the eye of our needle. I'm going to flatten it very gently, but not too much, because that pulls the burrs over and closes the hole. So what I'm going to use is, I'm just going to use an awl, a square section awl, but you could use the tip of a knife that you're not using or needing. Just very gently get it in there, just slowly rotate it and deburr the inside of the eye. That will open it up, and it'll also get rid of any sharp edges that might damage your thread. So now, I'm actually going to hammer that down just a bit, give us some room to work with. The hole is a little bit off centre, so we want to pay more attention to this side than we do this side when we file it. So we're going to file it so there's no bump, and that swell is rounded off and is smoother. Any little bumps in this needle, in the texture of the needle, will get snagged. So we want this to be a smooth taper. So that's what we'll do with our little file. Bring it over to our bench hook and just get on it with our fine file. You do want a fine file for this. Something like a jeweler's file is ideal. But any file will do in a pinch. But the finer the teeth, the better. I imagine pin-making files and needle-making files would have been a lot finer than the stand files at the time. They would have been specialist equipment. Probably a trade in itself, making the files for making the pins. I need a better grip, so I'm just going to grip it in my little pliers, sideways, rotate it around so it's comfortable. Again, smooth it off, get rid of any hammer marks, any lumps and bumps, but make sure you don't go through the walls of your needle, the eye of the needle. The walls are getting very thin now, so I think I'll call that done. I'll scoot it right down in my pliers now and just roll over the end so it's comfortable to push through stuff and it doesn't dig into anything. So clean that up. So the end of our needle is now done. The eye and the head are now done, if you can just about see the eye there. So that's all polished and clean. I do apologise for the camera quality. My phone is not a professional camera. So now that we've punched the hole and cleaned it up, all we have to do now is sharpen it, and that's exactly the same process as with the pins. So put it in the groove in our bench hook and rotate it as we go. And in fact, because I can feel it bending, because it has been annealed, what I will do is I will now actually work harden it before I do the finished sharpening. And that's quite a simple matter of just gently, with the flat of the hammer, as flat as you can, hammering it. Trying to keep it as round as possible. But the more you hammer it, the harder you're going to make the needle. And the stiffer you will make it. Which is important for a needle because you do not want your needle bending on you when you don't want it to bend. Holding it by the eye. Be careful not to hammer the eye, because obviously you will crush it, and we do not want that. That is our bronze historical needle. And just to prove that it works, I'm going to thread it through fabric. Thread through 2 layers, like that, comes right through, and it works. So there you go, that's how you make a needle. A reasonably useful skill if you haven't got one on hand, but you've got some jeweler's wire on hand and some kind of punch you can modify. You can make one. And of course these are really good for reenactment and for historical sewing if you're into that, and you don't want to have to buy them online. They do sell them on Etsy, but again, if you can make them yourself, it's a cool project to do. The pins are a lot easier because they don't require punching, and they're a worthwhile project to do. The knotted or coiled ones are a lot easier than the where is it? My little pin's gone. There he is. Than these ones, these little coil head ones. But again, they are all really nice little projects to do, and they're handy little objects to have as part of your sewing kit, or your just to have in the collection, really. Well, there you go. That's how you make pins and needles in the ye olde way. Thank you for watching. I hope it's been useful to someone.